Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned because it's time for my weekly reading report. My weekly reading report, that action-packed program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. And I did read some stuff, Roger, even though it hasn't been quite a week. I think my last reading report was on Thursday. Was it on Thursday? I can't remember for sure, but I think it was. But I do have some stuff to talk about. So what did I read the last time on this amazing show? Let's find out. I will break out my list. My list for the ongoing 500 book challenge, the challenge where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. And this stupid challenge is just rolling right into 2026. So, book number 326. We're at book 326, Roger. What was that? It was King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard, which I read for Haggard January, a reading event created by Randy Ray, the literate Texan. A reading event celebrating H. Rider Haggard, one of the greatest adventure writers of all time. He's pretty much the father of the adventure novel. A very influential writer. And King Solomon's Mines, I read in this beat-up old omnibus edition of H. Rider Haggard stories, which isn't much to look at, but it's a pretty great book. So this is from Black's Readers Service Company, this book, which was a subscription service. You get these books, which would always be the works of someone, and this volume is the works of Haggard. And this is the book I read King Solomon's Mines in, which I read for Haggard January. I was going to read H. Rider Haggard's biography, but then I thought, I really want to read King Solomon's Mines again, because it's been years and years since I've read it. And I'm glad I did, because man, what a great book. This book is so good, King Solomon's Mines. It is H. Rider Haggard's, I believe it was his first great adventure story. Not his first novel, but his first great adventure novel. And it was published in 1885 to great fanfare. There was a lot of publicity for this book, and it lived up to the hype. The publishers obviously knew what they had in this book, because it's great. It is the first Allan Quatermain novel. Allan Quatermain, who was an explorer and big game hunter in Africa. And Allan Quatermain was the main character in what became a series of stories. Although when H. Rider Haggard when H. Rider Haggard wrote this novel, I don't think he intended it to be a series. But it became a series because Allan Quatermain became super popular, and Haggard couldn't let him go, just like Conan Doyle couldn't let go of Sherlock Holmes because of his popularity. And he's a great character, Allan Quatermain, based on a real person, based on Frederick Courtney Selous, who was also a big game hunter and explorer. And H. Rider Haggard took inspiration from that guy to create Allan Quatermain, who's a really cool character. He, at this point in this novel, is 55 years old. So my exact age, Roger. And he's really brave, he's really tough, but he claims not to be those things because he's also really modest. And he is hired by Sir Henry Curtis to help him find his brother. So Sir Henry Curtis had a falling out with his brother, and his brother went off to Africa to make his fortune. And his brother disappeared looking for the fabled King Solomon's Mines. King Solomon's diamond mines, which are somewhere in Africa, according to legend. And Sir Henry Curtis's brother went off to look for those mines and disappeared. And now Sir Henry Curtis, who feels really bad for the fight that they had, really, really wants to find his brother. That's really his only motivation. He's not out at the beginning of the story to find the diamond mines themselves. He just wants to find his brother. He is accompanied by his good friend, Captain Good, who ends up being kind of the comedy relief of the story. Although he's a fine character all by himself, Captain Good he's awesome. All the characters in this book are great. And that's one of the strengths of H. Rider Haggard, is that all the characters in his book come across as genuine human beings. And that includes the natives, the African natives. They all come across as real, genuine human beings as well, which is something you don't always get in some of the stories that followed this one from other writers. But H. Rider Haggard had spent a lot of time in Africa. And so he was very familiar with different African natives, and he respected them. And you can tell when you read this book that he does. So Sir Henry Curtis hires Alan Quatermain, who's reluctant but decides to come along on this adventure. And they all go off to find King Solomon's mines. And there's a map that Alan Quatermain has. Alan Quatermain had met a man years and years ago who had claimed to be, who claims to have been to King Solomon's mines. But on the way, they have to cross this fierce desert and go through these mountains and practically starve to death and die of thirst and have all kinds of troubles. So it's rough going. They also have the help of a native named Umbopo, who's a really interesting character, and he comes along to help them. And they eventually cross the mountains that they need to cross, and they meet a lost tribe of Africans who are initially pretty hostile. But Alan Quatermain and Sir Henry and Captain Good convinced them that they are from the stars. They had never seen white people before, and they certainly had never seen rifles. So they thought, well, maybe the tribe thinks maybe, these guys are supernatural. Maybe they are from the stars. We better, see, let's not kill them right away. But not everybody, of course, is convinced. A lot of people in this tribe think that, they're probably just BSing them, which they were. So one of the things going on with this tribe is that the king is awful. Their king is just a tyrant. And so rebellion is brewing. And Umbopo has a secret, which I will not reveal, Roger. And there's a big rebellion, and Alan Quatermain and Henry Curtis and Captain Good and Umbopo all become involved. And yes, King Solomon's mines are there beyond the mountains. And so a lot of stuff goes on. And it's just a fantastic novel. At times, very violent at times. I was surprised in rereading this how violent it was. I had just forgotten. And certainly incredibly adventurous. This must have been really something for the Victorian readers at the time. It's no wonder that this became such a bestseller. And like I said, it forced Haggard to bring back Alan Quatermain for a sequel, which was called Alan Quatermain, which certainly seemed to be the last Alan Quatermain novel. It doesn't seem like you could really have a sequel after that. But Haggard finds a way, and there is a whole series of Alan Quatermain adventures that followed this. Most of those you will not find in print anymore. Only a few of H. Rider Haggard's books are still in print. She is still in print. King Solomon's Mines, its sequel, Alan Quatermain, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, you can get print-on-demand books of Alan Quatermain's books, which, who knows what the quality would be on those. And you could certainly find every single, I think you could find every single H. Rider Haggard book as ebooks. They're all in the public domain. So it'll cost you nothing to read this book. It'll cost you nothing to read any Haggard book if you've got an e-reader. And I do recommend him because he's so fantastic and extremely influential. He was a huge influence on Edgar Rice Burroughs, who became, of course, the master of the adventure novel. He was influential on Robert E. Howard. He was an influence on a ton of writers. And a lot of his books are really, really good, but King Solomon's Mines is just exceptional. The pacing is great. The characters are great. It's a page turner. It's just as readable today as it was when it was written. So just as good now as it was in 1885. So I highly recommend King Solomon's Mines. It's magnificent. So that was that, Roger. That was King Solomon's Mines. I'll put it right here. So I did finish one other book since we spoke last, which was book 327, which was this big guy. I finally finished Superman, the Exile, and Other Stories Omnibus. A gigantic volume of Superman stories. And these stories take place after John Byrne left the book after his revamp in the mid-1980s. So he left the book, and he had basically restarted the Superman mythos, changed a bunch of stuff, and then he left, and they had to take over after John Byrne's run. And what a fantastic job DC did with Superman after that, because if anything, Superman comic books were better after Byrne left than when he was on the book. And this series of comics is just fantastic. The main storyline going through most of this omnibus is that during John Byrne's run, John Byrne made the incredibly controversial choice. He made a few controversial choices in his run, but he had Superman actually execute some criminals. So Superman did the thing Superman's not supposed to do, which was in an alternate reality. An alternate planet Earth was wiped out by some Kryptonian criminals. These Kryptonian criminals, led by their General Zod, wiped out all life on planet Earth and threatened to come to Superman's reality and do the same thing there. And Superman felt like the only choice he had was to execute them so they wouldn't cause any other trouble. Now, of course, there are other choices that could have been made, but that's how John Byrne did it. And so he left the book, and a lot of the writers and the editor of this series of books, which was Carlin, I'm forgetting, it was Mike Carlin. It was Mike Carlin. How could I forget that name? So Mike Carlin wasn't particularly thrilled, I don't think, with that idea either of Superman killing people. So most of this book is Superman dealing with the guilt of that choice. They could have just forgotten it. They could have just swept it under the rug and forgotten all about it and just moved on. But it was such a big deal that Superman did that Mike Carlin and the writers of this book, Jerry Ordway, Dan Jurgens, Roger Stern, all the creators of this book, created the stories of Superman dealing with that choice of what he did and dealing with the guilt of that and trying to move on from that. And Superman exiles himself from the planet Earth at one point. And that's a big chunk of this book. Eventually he comes back to Earth, of course. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in this book, and it's just really great. The artwork is great. The stories are great. These stories take place before the Triangle era of Superman. Here we have Superman on Warworld battling Mongol. So that happens in this era of Superman, and it's great. It's just, the whole thing is fantastic. We get some wonderful creators, some great stories. So yeah, I loved it. And I spent pretty big chunk of yesterday finishing this book. And yeah, it's wonderful. So because I am reading Superman every day, that's one challenge I have going on, is to read a Superman story every day. And yesterday I read a whole mess of them to polish off this omnibus. So I finished that. Which means, unfortunately, that I haven't read a bunch of Spider-Man recently, which is another challenge I have going on, to read all of the first run of Spider-Man. So I'm behind on Spider-Man, so I'm going to be trying to catch up on that today. What issue am I at? I'm only on issue 21. So I'm way behind, so I'm going to have to catch up today. But this issue looks awesome because there's the Human Torch and the incredibly lame villain, the Beetle. You remember the Beetle? Probably not, because he was lame. So I have to read more of Spider-Man today. What am I reading right at this moment, Roger? So right at this moment, I am reading Ursula K. Le Guin's Rocannon's World. And I'm reading it out of this Library of America volume, the Hainish Novels and Stories Volume 1. 2-volume set from the Library of America. And it's a beautiful set of books. And most of the Hainish novels I've never read. I've only actually read The Left Hand of Darkness. That's it. And there is a read-along going on right now of the Hainish novels, which is hosted by the wonderful channel Books, Songs, and Other Magic. Gareth over there at Books, Songs, and Other Magic came up with this read-along. And so every month we're reading a Hainish novel. And I'm reading the first one, Rocannon's World. And I'm reading it out of this magnificent book, which has an introduction by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is unusual for a Library of America book. Library of America books usually do not have introductions, but this one does, and it's just great. It's the perfect introduction by Le Guin, where she talks about the creation of the Hainish novels and how and why she went about writing these books. Very good introduction. And I'm on the first part of Rocannon's World, so far it's excellent. Originally published as one half of an ace double. I imagine that particular book is worth something. Unfortunately, that's an ace double I do not have, unfortunately. But yeah, originally published as one half of an ace double, and she has some amusing things to say about ace doubles in this book. It's really, really good, which should not be a surprise, because what a wonderful writer Ursula K. Le Guin is. She's just so good. So I'm going to have a good time reading this book and reading all of these books, I think. So Rocannon's World, I'm reading that right now. It's a really short book, so I should be done with it probably today or tomorrow, actually, depending on how much time I have to read. We will see. Excellent, though. And so this is going to be a lot of fun. There's a book I'm going to be reading next, but I forgot to bring it out. Hold on. Okay, yeah. After Rocannon's World, I'm going to be moving on to Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. I'm going to be reading these books this year. And so I am going to be moving on to Swords and Deviltry, the first book of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. So I know that these were published in a series of paperback books that were not published in the order that the stories were originally written. But I am going to be reading them in the order that they were published in the paperback books, just to make my life easier. And the first book is Swords and Deviltry, where, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a long time since I've read these books. I think there's like a Grey Mouser story, and there's a Fafhrd story, and I think it has a story in here where they meet. I believe. Does it? Yeah. Ilmet and Lankmar. Yeah. So it's got 4 stories in this book. Looking forward to this one. Looking forward to this series, because from what I remember, this is a dynamite series. So I'm going to be reading that. I did get something in the mail a while back that I forgot to talk about last time, which is a new Marvel Epic Collections. They are excluded from the 500 book challenge because I do collect these and have for over 10 years now. But this is interesting. So this is Captain America, American Nightmare. Mark Waid wrote these stories. So this Epic Collection is Epic Collection Volume 24. These Epic Collections are not printed in chronological order. They kind of bounce around. And these are stories from 1998 to 1999. What makes this really interesting is that the previous epic collection that was published, the last final epic collection in the line so far, was volume 22. So volume 23 is obviously going to be the terrible Heroes Reborn Captain America. So that is going to have its Heroes Reborn Captain America is going to have its own volume. And that was just... I am not a big fan of the Heroes Reborn Captain America series, but I will get it, of course. Of course, I'll get it. So I have a full run of Captain America. But Mark Waid and Ron Gardner, they were doing a great job on Captain America, and suddenly they were forced off the book so that Marvel could do their whole Heroes Reborn revamp, which lasted, I think, 12 issues. And then sensibly, Marvel brought back Mark Waid for Captain America. And this series of stories is just great. I mean, some of the best Captain America stories you'll read took place at this time. Just a fantastic series of Captain America stories. So this is going to be great when I finally get around to reading these again. And the first run of Captain America ended with Heroes Reborn. So this is actually has Captain America issue number 1, which is a new series that starts after the Heroes Reborn series ends. So this is actually because Captain America this is actually the 4th series of Captain America, if you think about it, because there was the Golden Age series, the 1960s series, Heroes Reborn, and then this. So it was an interesting time for Captain America, and Captain America was really, really good at this particular period, 98 and 99. So I got this in the mail, and it was really awesome, and I'm glad to have it. And I'll shut up now because I've been talking long enough. Epic Comic Book Wednesday returns tomorrow. I will see you then.